How I changed careers at 48 years of age with no formal education, no experience, to a six-figure income. At 48 years of age, I was bankrupt, broke, with a declining income in my current job, which was tennis coaching. I had no savings, no superannuation, no property, literally fucked. I knew this was a turning point in my life. I also felt at this age I really only had one chance to change careers, because I would have to do some courses or complete some trainings and possibly obtain some licenses. So now I went through a very strategic process that I'm going to share with you. And if I was in the same position again today, I would repeat this exact process. So the first thing I did was accept the serious crossroads I was at in my life and career. Then what I did was I grabbed a piece of paper and I made two columns on it. First column was all the things that I didn't want in a new job, and the second column was all the things that I did want. Now, I carried this piece of paper in my pocket for 6 months, and every time I had a thought, I would jot that down, and I went through this thorough process. So, some points I noted. I don't want to serve customers. I don't want to work with children, or more so deal with parents. I want the opportunity for an immediate high income, or at least a short-term opportunity to reach one. I was prepared to pay for all the necessary pre-job courses, training and licenses, so when I presented at 48 years of age, they would take me seriously. I considered doing a mature age apprenticeship. I considered joining the police force. I even considered becoming a corrections officer, as I'd always been fascinated by prisons. I considered a hire car driver, or possibly truck driving. I considered working in the mines, mainly as a dump truck driver. I also considered working in the rigs in oil and gas, as I'd always had a fascination with how oil and gas was extracted from the ground. I explored every single option thoroughly and eventually landed on working on the rigs in oil and gas. Now, would that be offshore or would that be onshore? At first I liked the idea of offshore, but as I looked further into it, I found that was much harder to get into. And this was 10 years ago when the oil price had declined and was in a bit of a slump. So I did more research about working on land, and what I found was Queensland was the only state in Australia that was predominantly doing on land drilling for gas. So what I did was explored how do I get into that as an entry level, and the way to do that is to become a lease hand. Okay, so I looked at all the courses that I needed to do to become a lease hand, and that included working at heights, confined spaces, gas test atmospheres, operate light vehicles in the field, well site permit to work, industry induction, all these short one-day courses that I could take before presenting for a job. So I flew to Queensland and I did what was called a rig ready week, 5 days with Harness Energy, where I picked up a lot of these tickets. Then also at home in Melbourne, I also then went and got my non-synchro mesh truck driving license. I got my forklift license. I got my white card. And then once I'd completed those trainings, I looked at all the companies in Queensland and I made a note of them, and I actually flew to Queensland and knocked on the door of all of these companies, and I had a paper copy of my CV and a cover letter, and I presented that. Now, half of the companies wouldn't even accept that. They said they'll only take online inquiries, but a couple did. And Anyway, but the industry was in a bit of a downturn at that time, so there was no possibility of really getting a job. But I was determined that that was the job I was going to look for, because I'd got those courses and that was the path I was going to take. Now, I do believe that being strategic and just aiming for one position or one job was important in my success. So I wasn't looking at a variety of different positions. So whilst I was waiting, I spoke to a recruiter at Harness and I said to him, what would be any other courses that I could do that when the industry does pick up, they would take me seriously, or they would put me certainly at the start of the line. And he had mentioned to me I could do my International Well Control BOP ticket. Now, I had no idea what that is, but I looked into it a little bit more. And what I found was that was basically the qualification that derrickmen and drillers get. And it's basically got to do with all the mathematical calculations for well control and managing that. And I thought that sounded pretty good. So I enrolled in that, and I spent 6 hours a day for 6 weeks studying for this. Now, this is a certificate that people that haven't worked in the industry just don't do. Normally, people that take on this level of training, they already work in the industry. So I undertook that course, spent the week, and whilst many people that were doing the course felt that there was no chance that I could possibly pass because I had no experience, I did pass. And what was quite ironic was there were a number of other guys in the class that were all doing their BOP ticket with their employers having paid for it. And each one of them said to me at the end, they said, oh, here's the number, call such and such at Savannah, call such and such at Saxon, call such and such at Eastonwell, at Wild Desert, and give them my name and tell them that, that I sent you, because they had thought that anybody that had the determination to pass the BOP ticket was certainly worthy of having their name put forward. So once I had passed my BOP ticket, so now I've got my BOP ticket, I've got all of these tickets, and what I did was I got some manila folders and I printed off again copies of all my cover letter and my CV. And again, I hired a car and I drove around to every single company in Queensland. Now at that stage, it was 42 different companies I drove to and knocked on the door. There were 5 or 6 main companies that were going to be my focus, and I was hoping for a breakthrough with them. But I did actually visit 41 different companies. So a number of the places, some remembered me from having gone there 3 or 4 months earlier, and none of them at that stage were hiring. However, when I drove to Toowoomba, which was the place where most of these companies are located, I knocked on the door at Eastonwell, and sure enough, the girl there at least was happy to take the paper copy of my CV and my cover letter. Anyway, I got on a plane, flew back home to Melbourne, and sure enough, a couple of days later, the phone rang and it was a recruiter calling from Eastonwell. And sure enough, they invited me to a recruitment day to fly back to Toowoomba. So I flew back up there and I joined this recruitment day. So there was, I believe, 10 of us doing that, and at the start of the day they told us that only 5 would be accepted into the rig pool and considered for a job. And I was 10, 15 years older than every single one of them. Most of the others were in their 20s and had some rig experience. But, you know, half of them turned up just in t-shirts and shorts. You know, I at least put on nice clothes and a collared shirt and made sure I presented well. And anyway, so they had a couple of tests that we had to sit, and one of them was like a mechanical test where we had to take apart and put back together a piece of equipment, and it was a dog collar. And I'm not don't have really good mechanical aptitude. Anyway, I struggled a little bit through this task, but I eventually completed it. And then I went through the interview process, and then I walked away thinking, okay, well, I hope it went really well. I put my best foot forward. And then sure enough, a couple of days later, the phone rang and I had got through that process. So I was then entered the rig pool, where I was then waiting for a start on one of the rigs. And it took a couple of months before I did get a start on the rig, and I got a start on rig 22. And I come on as a lease hand. Now, this was really difficult because I was 48 years of age. Everyone else that I was working on that first crew, they were much younger than me, okay? But I had a few things that I needed to make sure I did. And there was two words that I wanted to make sure never ever came out of my mouth. And that was, I know. Why? Because I needed the help of my crewmates, okay? So every time they had some advice for me, I needed to accept it and take it on board. Now, even if it was a similar task that I'd done 3 or 4 different times with 3 or 4 different people, and I'd been shown 3 or 4 different ways, I always thanked the guys for showing me, okay, and showed my appreciation. And then what I did, I would then figure out, okay, so which way was the best to perform that task? Because often I was shown something 3 or 4 different ways, but I needed all of them to know that I appreciated their help. Because when we did come to a task that was too difficult for me to do and I needed their help, I needed them to give it openly to me. The other thing I needed to do was basically stop the negativity from having been bankrupt and having and losing all my money and just life turning to shit. I needed to have a positive outlook, and that meant getting back to my old self. Be fun to be with. Be somebody they want to have around. Be a positive contributor. Be funny, not entertaining, but just be good company. And I really worked hard on that. Okay, so by being a positive member of a crew, and even though I didn't have very good mechanical aptitude, they wanted to have me around, they wanted to help me, and they wanted to keep me around. And ultimately, that is what made me successful on the rigs. Because the rigs is a bloody tough place to work. It's hard in the conditions. It takes strong personalities to work out there, okay? But it's a great place to work once you pass that initial first time. So anyway, here I am as a lease hand, and I'm struggling through all my tasks. And I remember when I was out there, it was in the middle of Queensland, it was 45 degrees and we were rig moving, and we're out there sweating our asses off. And I looked inside the smoko shack and there was the safety advisor sitting there in the air conditioning, basically doing stuff all. And I thought to myself, I've got to get that job, okay? Because one of the things about starting at 48 years of age, I was probably too late to really advance up within the crew structure to a higher position. And certainly the entry-level position is not a career path. So I had thought to myself, what do I do to get this job as safety advisor? And I looked into that too. And that was to get my Cert 4 in work health safety. So I took it upon myself, I enrolled in that, and I went and got my Cert 4 in work health safety. And what was ironic, I'd now been on the rig for probably 1.5 years, coming up 2 years. And one day, both rig managers called me in and they said to me, what are we going to do with you? Okay, you're a positive contributor to the rig, the guys love having you around, but basically you're fucking useless at your job in a nice way, okay? Basically, that here I was at 50, how am I going to keep working on the rigs in this position? And they said, we're not firing you, but what are you going to do? And that was when I said to them, well, guys, what I am interested in is becoming a safety advisor. And I've nearly completed my Cert 4 in work health safety. And then they said to me, great idea. They said they couldn't think of a better path for me on the rigs, and so they even put my name forward and assisted me in getting that. So when a opportunity came up with our company, which was Eastonwell, I grabbed it with both hands, and then I was taken on as a safety advisor. Now, when I was a safety advisor, I also took it upon myself to do my Cert 4 in trainer and assessor, okay? And again, I paid for that myself. Now, on the rigs, you get a lot of people that think, oh, I can be a safety advisor, what a great job. But they're not willing to pay to get this training themselves. So I spend $5,000 on getting this training, on top of the near $15,000 I spent to get a start out there. But here's the thing, it was nearly all tax deductible anyway, so I got most of the money I outlaid on training and certificates, I got back on tax. So it turned out to be a win-win. And then here I am, basically 10 years later. I'm still working on the rigs, okay? I have the best income that I've ever had in my life. I'm able to rebuild my life, and I'm now transitioning into being an online fitness trainer, fitness coach with one kettlebell. Fitness is my passion. And one thing I do want to sort of finish off with, and people might say, well, how does changing careers sort of marry up with fitness training or training with one kettlebell? I'll tell you something, guys, if you're in your 40s or 50s and you are serious about changing careers, get yourself fit first. Present in great shape, okay? They'll take you seriously, they'll look at you differently, they'll know that here's a man who's serious about what he does, okay? But if you turn up just like a fat mess, okay, just overweight, you know, high blood pressure, you know, they're not going to take you on, okay? I don't believe so anyway. But by presenting in great physical shape, that gave me the chance to change careers into a six-figure job. Now, the process I did go through, I believe, would be exactly the same for changing careers into any job, okay? First of all, you need to identify what you do want and you don't want in a job. Then you have to put every possibility on the table, okay? And some of them you'll take more seriously than others. Some of them may be a little bit unrealistic. And then you have to work out how much you're willing to do to get that, okay? I do think it is important to choose one thing and shoot at that. For me, I only had one bullet in the gun and I couldn't miss my target. So I chose oil and gas industry, on land, in Queensland, entry level, lease hand. And then I did my research on everything I needed to get that position. So when I presented to get that job, okay, they took me seriously. And what was funny was after 3 months of working in that position, I passed probation, and I rang the recruiter and I thanked her for giving me the opportunity. And you know something she said to me? She said, Dean, we were always going to take you on. She said, we've never seen anybody try so hard and be so determined to get a start out here that we knew we had to give you a chance. So sometimes going over and above and doing everything you can to put yourself to the front of the queue can make the difference. Doesn't matter how old you are, but do present in good shape. I hope some of this advice helps you, and I look forward to sharing more about this journey with you. Okay, stay strong. See you next time.